Hey guys, here we are in Module 5, continuing on in our conversation. This video is going to be dealing with an aspect of family life and what is going on emotionally and psychologically for both partners. We're going to be talking about mental load in this video. We're going to be talking about defining what does this mean, this mental load idea that we're discussing. You might have heard of it, you might not have. We'll be discussing what it is, why does it matter, why does it matter to your family life, to your relationship, to your love life, and then how do I even it out? So let's have a look here. What is mental load? Some have described it this way: the anticipation, organization, delegation, and implementation of tasks regarding the home and children. So I don't know if you're anything like me, but just reading that sentence makes me feel so tired. And so that's what mental load is just the weight of managing all of these different items. I saw this fantastic cartoon. It's by an artist named Emma. The name of the cartoon is You Should Have Asked. You can Google it. It's fantastic. It's a helpful description of mental load. What she says is when a man expects his partner to ask him to do things, he's viewing her as the manager of household chores. So it's up to her to know what needs to be done and when. The problem is that planning and organizing is already a full-time job. So when we ask women to take on the task of organization and at the same time execute a large portion, in the end it represents 75% of the work. So what I'll say in this part is, right here is describing a man and a woman. I understand that in many families it may not look like that the partner that holds more of the mental load might be the man. And if you're in a same-sex couple or non-binary, then we may not use the descriptors of man and woman, but in this situation we're using this to describe the partner that holds more of the mental load and their experience, as well as the partner that is holding less of the mental load and what they may be experiencing. So we can just dive in here with the impact to families and even the culture in a larger sense. You know, for this impact piece, I'm actually going to invite in a special visitor. I've asked my husband, Aaron, to participate in this conversation, and he can also give you some of his feedback on impact.
Hey guys.
So, in my experience working with couples and families, what I have noticed about mental load is that it is almost completely held by women. It is deeply exhausting, and one of the biggest challenges is that it's invisible. It's not even a thing that we know is happening, and so it's really difficult to talk about or make any progress on.
Absolutely, and that invisible aspect I have found true for me. It's one of those things that has been completely invisible to me until we started to unravel this and really got into the weeds on it, and then all of a sudden I started to see it everywhere. And one of the big things for me as I've engaged mental load is that because of my lack of experience with all of these things that impact our family, I have felt incompetent, and that feeling of incompetence has held up the system that has been this imbalance in mental load. And so that's been the impact that I've seen.
Yeah, and you know, actually, to refer back to earlier parts of this this module, reflecting on the breaks component, this can be one of those chronic off, off, off pieces that impacts women. It can be that break that just kind of gets stuck there, managing more of the mental load than one can really handle. So after we've talked about the impact, you know, it'd be interesting to know, how did we get here? Many of these are going to be really intuitive to you. You may know exactly how you got here from your family of origin. These are some cultural components that I'll reflect on. You know, it's as easy as looking at what kind of toys girls are given to play with. Vacuums and cleaning toys and babies. as well as boys. What are they given? Trucks and lasers and rocks and things like that. Honestly, our mothers modeled managing the majority of the mental load. There's a tongue twister for you. And that was so much. When we saw that's what was going on, then we just intuit that that's also what we should replicate. Culture ends up reinforcing it. When we see what our parents, when the negotiation of mental load goes on, we end up intuiting part of that, and then culture ends up coming along to reinforce it. One of the pieces that's a really hard thing to undo as well as change is that in the beginning, especially of a child's life, there are biological demands on women that create the systems around pregnancy, birth, and nursing, and caring for the children that create these systems where women end up holding more responsibility. And that may be true, but one of the biggest challenges is that these systems are not revisited. And that ends up being such a challenge in these homes, right? And women are more present in the workforce now, but they still remain primarily in charge of the household. So do the math and you can see how uneven and how stressful that can end up being. And one more piece to reflect on is that some research actually references maturity differences in genders based on age. And so perhaps it might take males longer for their brains to mature. And so their just base skills may be a little bit different. And so some of those base skills end up influencing the course and the trajectory of mental load for far beyond when the differences actually level out in the brains. So I want you to do this thought experiment. If your partner died today, in how many areas of life would you be totally lost? Let's think about kids and finances and pets and household, banking issues and life insurance, car insurance, dental issues. I want you to consider that question. Do this quick quiz with me. This will help you reflect on it. Do you know what size shoes and clothes all of your children wear right now? Do you know how to log into your bank account? And it's the 3rd of the month. Do you know what your balance should be right now? Which vaccinations have your children, have your pets had, and what do they need? If they need to be boarded, what vaccinations? Your pets, obviously. Your kids, if they're going to be starting kindergarten. What are the differences between what they needed at pre-K versus what they need in kindergarten? Do you know how to sort and handle all of the laundry needs of the household? Do you know which of your daughter's princess items can go all the way through the wash and be dried? For your son's underwear, do you know that he does not like them dried because they get entirely too tight? Do you know the name and number of anyone who comes into contact with your children or with your pets? That means their phone number, their addresses. And then for your own self, for your health, your car, your life insurance, do you know who those carriers are? Do you know how to get in contact with them? Do you know how to submit a claim if that's something that were to come up? So as you can see, there's so much mental information that is being held in the brain within a family and how much that can end up impacting stress. Something that we're going to be talking about is how this process of both always having to anticipate and always having to remember the kind of weight over the long term, how that ends up impacting one's functioning, and then ends up impacting the kind of connection that the two partners can have. It drains much of the playfulness, much of the spontaneity, much of the creativity out of the relationship when the mental load is highly imbalanced. So when we come to this conversation about always having to anticipate, I know listing these questions may make your cortisol, your stress hormones spike through the roof, but just hang with me because this is what is going on in each of your heads, and if it's imbalanced, it's a big struggle. What needs to happen with cash flow now and through the month to keep everything in the black? What are those numbers? How does that need to go? What events are coming up and what needs to be ordered, washed, funded, filled out, coordinated to make that a success? What's the level of hand soap, laundry detergent, coffee, milk, watercolor paint, dog food, kid snacks, and lunches? And when on each of those is it critical to refill so that nobody's needs end up going missed? What's the emotional/stress level of each little body in your home? We're talking about pets, people, plants, humans, all of it in the home, and what do we need to be doing to resource each of those little bodies to keep them at an optimal level? You can imagine the process of being in the position of anticipating how much that ends up wearing on one, especially if it's invisible, the way that mental load often is. So on the other piece, right, where there's always having to anticipate and then there's always having to remember. There's this running queue of things that are going to be happening immediately, and if I miss out, then there will be some member of my family who will end up going without. So always having to remember to add cotton balls to the list, that the babysitter wasn't paid for last week, that today is the last day to schedule a doctor's appointment to make it in time to get the vaccinations for enrollment for preschool. Then to fill out the preschool enrollment. You know, the dog seemed kind of itchy lately. He probably needs his flu medicine. When was the last time we did that? Oh, and remember when I go to the store to make sure and pick up his flu medicine. And, the credit card is due on the 15th. I need to make sure and remember that. Right, so you can hear this just like running list of items that are always having to remember. And when there's an imbalance in the mental load, you can imagine how the brakes would unevenly be pressed in that situation. Not to mention the amount of stress and the amount of kind of inability to be present with current interactions and current relationships, all of the challenging impacts of always having to anticipate and always having to remember, and then going through the stress and the struggle of the implementation. Meanwhile, most of this is invisible, which means that the culture of appreciation and gratitude would be quite low, that the opportunities for reflecting appreciation on the many items that one was managing, that their partner may not even have the opportunity to express gratitude because so many of these items were assumed to be handled and they weren't even being talked about in the partnership. And so that can also be a real struggle. So let's start to talk about how does it impact families. So you can see how I just described how much breaks end up impacting the couple's intimate life. That seems pretty clear. All that noisy monkey brain that's going on in someone's head makes it quite difficult for them to settle themselves down and connect. Also, you end up continuing a cycle when children see and learn that the burden is a woman's to manage, and they learn so much from modeling.
And I will add to that if children know that they need to go to their mother to get answers on anything, and the dad doesn't have the answers, it just reinforces the dad's role of being aloof. And so the children seeing both parents having capability is super important for things to start to shift. Now, as I mentioned before, as men feel less competent because they have less experience, it just reinforces the system. And there's this this system around never being able to do it right. That's the old thing about women nagging men, of just not doing it right. Part of it is because we're not engaged with the process and we don't know enough to do it well and to really engage. And this actually speaks to, there's a lot of sitcoms out there, where men just look like idiots. And you probably could rattle off a few just off the top of your head. And that just kind of feeds into this narrative. And helplessness just reinforces the cycle.
So you might be wondering, okay, that all doesn't sound good. There's this cyclical nature to it. There's this stress that one partner is experiencing. There's this helplessness that the other partner is experiencing. So here is an option of a way to start to kind of take this system apart. I want you to start it, I want you to consider doing it in a 2-stage approach. In the first stage, I want you to be just really thinking and paying attention to all of the recurrent chores that you see all around you. I want you to make a list. Every tiny detail, everything that ever needs to happen. I'm actually going to attach a template that can give you a whole bunch of different categories to start this process. And then I want you to do something that might be very stressful and a little bit difficult, but I want you to shoot for 50-50. I want you to assign tasks to partner A and to partner B, and that the goal is that the two lists look relatively even to each other.
I'll jump in here and I will say that is going to feel overwhelming especially for the partner that has been under functioning to this point. Now that is part of the process here, which is for the under functioning partner to start to feel the weight of this load that has been carried without their knowledge for some time now.
So then, after you have done that very overwhelming thing, I want you to try stage 2. So I want you to try stage 1 for 30 to 90 days, 1 to 3 months, and then I want you to revisit, have another conversation. This time, what I want you to consider is allowing for a strengths-based approach. If you have a CPA and you have an Etsy fanatic, then it would make sense that each of you may gravitate toward different tasks, be really efficient at them, you maybe even have some passion for them, and that may end up having your list look a little bit different than just that 50-50. Allowing for that strengths-based approach really does set you up for a better long-term option, and it will allow each of you to find an equilibrium and let it continue to be a more and more organic process, especially as your family changes and it grows and new tasks come on. You can evaluate them through this new lens of the strengths-based approach while working to keep some evenness so that overwhelm doesn't get lopsided to one or the other.
All right, and so if you are the less involved partner, what do you do from here? Like, how do you approach this? Overwhelm is going to be the first reaction. It was for me. But here's some strategy. Pick low-hanging fruit just to get going. Things that you might enjoy, that you might already have some interest in, that you have some awareness of already. Go ahead and try to take some of those things on. Create systems that fit your way of doing things. I will tell you, this has been a game changer for me because I will never do things the way that June does them. I have my own way. And so to be able to have the freedom to come in and just redo the whole system to make it mine, made it doable. And then look for opportunities to carry mental load. Again, this is invisible. And so one of the greatest ways that you can look for opportunities is simply be curious. So when she mentions that there's a doctor's appointment coming up, ask a lot of questions about that doctor's appointment. Get into the nitty-gritty of every little detail that has to do with the scheduling, why the appointment's happening, and all of that. And so even if no action is taken, some of that mental load is being offloaded just by you engaging the process.
So that's the option if you've been less involved. Getting more attuned is important. If you've been the more involved partner, here's the question. It's going to make your stomach hurt. How do you let things fall? Ugh, I know. Fall, fail, fall between the cracks, however you want to see it, however you want to say it, that's what's going to be needed. If it does not belong to you, you must let it be. That's the rule. And knowing that failure is progress, how you handle the mistakes is everything in this change. And also using your self-regulation tools that we've been working on to help lower your overwhelm in reference to your partner's discomfort. If you notice they are really struggling with the change, you may offer compassion, but if you get so overwhelmed that you step in to rescue, then the whole process is really undercut. I'll give you an example of that in just a minute. And so it's so important for you to be prepared to let some things fall through the cracks and pay attention to how you would like to handle it when that happens. So I want to actually tell a little bit about our story and what it was that made room for some really big changes in my experience of mental load, and what were some of the things that kind of held us up and how we continued to move through that process. One of the reasons I want to share our story is that it can validate, normalize how long this can take. Now I say here, be prepared for this to take time. It could take 3 to 5 years. I also think it's probably going to take the rest of our lives because we will always be getting new tasks and we will continue to be working out how do we manage them in our family. And so know that this really can take time and that it changes course as life evolves. As you get new tasks, that there's this process, there's this new lens that you can see things through to have a different experience in your family. And know that the process is the point. Your intentionality of stepping into this to let things be different so that your kids even can experience this differently. The process of engaging with it is the point. So I actually have a few examples, from our life in navigating this. I was the manager of the finances for many years, and I would often feel overwhelmed, and I would ask Aaron, can you take this? Can you manage the finances? And I would do this very unhelpful thing in that when he would engage with the finances, my anxiety kept running the show, and I kept going behind him and checking accounts and checking balances and reminding him of things. And I was undercutting his ability to fully engage in the process. And that was a very unhelpful way to make our way through that.
For sure. Yeah, for my experience of that, what it really took to kind of turn the tide in the finances was for me to pick up a few things in the finances and own those and create my systems around those accounts and those just small things. And then once I created those systems, really taking over things from there. But until I got to that point and got familiar enough with the systems at large, we kept reverting back to the way we were always doing things. Another way that, another story that has transpired for us that has been a work in progress is actually our 3-year-old's wardrobe. She is a true princess and she has copious amounts of clothes. And I had never engaged her closet, her wardrobe, or anything for her entire life, and she just turned 3 this summer. And mostly I didn't engage it because it was incredibly overwhelming and I didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But recently, I went through it, I organized it, I got rid of a bunch of clothes, and now I can actually engage the process. It used to be to where I wouldn't even put her clothes away because I didn't know where anything went, and that was my excuse. I have no knowledge of this ecosystem, so I can't engage it. Now that I have recreated the ecosystem and I have done it in a way that makes sense to me, I am fully engaged and can now put her clothes away, and I know where everything is.
You know, a really sweet thing that happened from that is that as he was creating categories, he held up one of the shirts that she had and he called it a blouse. He said, these are her t-shirts, these are her blouses. And I just felt this warmth of reflecting on the growing intimacy even that he would end up getting access to by me stepping out and allowing him to throw out some things that I really liked of hers, but for him to engage fully, create his own system around it. I was just paying attention to the continued opportunities for that connection.
And I will say this, is that this process is not about men becoming more feminine or having a more androgynous relationship. This process is carrying the load equally so that it increases intimacy with all parties within the family. This process of carrying mental load has increased my intimacy with June, and it has also increased my intimacy with our children because I am so much more aware of the things going on in their lives, and they can tell.
So I want to offer just a few ending reminders of you've heard the difficulty. There's the reward that we just talked about, is that increased connection for all parties involved. So I want to just give you a few lasting little ideas, and that's just to be realistic. You got to give both stage 1 and stage 2 time to evolve. This won't be overnight. Both parties need to be patient. It won't be a quick process, but pay attention to your compassion. Work on your own self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. You will be learning a new skill, whether the learning is to engage or the learning is to restrain. You'll be learning something new, and that your self-compassion is essential. And working to offer compassion, because it's hard to stay back and it's hard to engage. They're both difficult things. And deeply important, mistakes mean you're trying. So give it a go. Try out stage 1. We can talk about the process that you'll be engaged in and what it is that you're learning. I will be there to reflect and validate the difficulty, but also the rewards. I appreciate your time and attention, and I will see you in the next video.